The moment I knew I was done pretending was the moment the intake officer at the downtown Omega Bonding Center slid a clipboard across the counter and said, "Sign here, here, and here, and we'll have a bed for you by tonight." I stared at the form. Name, designation, bond status, emergency contact, reason for admission. There was a line at the bottom that read, "I voluntarily surrender my independent housing status and agree to reside under bonding center supervision until matched or otherwise discharged." Voluntarily. Like I had a choice. Like the eviction notice crumpled in my coat pocket and the $37 in my bank account and the fact that my heat was due in 9 days left me with options. I picked up the pen. And that's when a voice behind me said, "Put the pen down." I turned around, and the man standing in the doorway of the bonding center lobby was the last person I expected to see. Tall, sharp jaw, black wool coat that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent, dark eyes that swept over me, then the clipboard, then the intake officer, with an expression so cold it dropped the temperature in the room. "He's not signing that," the man said. The intake officer blinked. "Sir, this is a private facility. If you're not here for processing, I'm going to need you to leave." The man didn't move. He looked at me, and something in his gaze made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. "You're not sleeping here," he said quietly. And then, louder, to the officer, "He's coming with me." I opened my mouth to say I had no idea who this man was, that he had no right to make decisions for me, that I was a grown adult Omega who could handle his own disaster of a life. But before I could speak, his scent hit me. Clean cedar and black tea and something electric underneath, something that made every Omega instinct I'd spent years suppressing sit up and pay attention. My hand went slack. The pen rolled off the counter, and the alpha in the expensive coat said, "You'll sleep next to me or not at all. That's not negotiable." Welcome to Moonlit Episodes. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really encourages my work and helps me bring you more stories. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I read every comment. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. 3 weeks earlier, I was still pretending everything was fine. My name is Haru Nishikawa. I'm 26 years old, Omega, and until recently, I was doing an impressive job of convincing myself that my life wasn't falling apart. I've been working as a junior graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Seattle for 2 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid my rent on a tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill, covered my suppressants, and left me just enough to eat if I was careful. I built that life from nothing after my parents disowned me at 19. They were traditional. Old-school Japanese-American family, third generation, who'd held on to certain values about designation with an iron grip. When I presented as Omega at 16, my father stopped looking at me. Not all at once. It was gradual. The way he'd shift his eyes when I entered a room, the way conversations would thin out when I sat down at the dinner table. My mother cried for a week after my presentation, not because she was sad for me, but because she was embarrassed. An Omega son in a family of alphas was a stain she couldn't bleach out. My older brother Kenji, who'd presented as alpha at 14 and been the family's golden child ever since, told me it wasn't personal, that our parents just needed time to adjust. 7 years later, they still hadn't adjusted. The last time I'd spoken to my mother was on my 24th birthday. She'd called to tell me that Kenji was getting bonded to a suitable Omega from a good family, a male Omega from the Hayashi clan, whose pedigree apparently made up for the fact that he was Omega. And maybe if I came home and behaved properly, they could find someone for me too. Someone who wouldn't mind that I was, and she'd paused here searching for the right word, difficult. I'd hung up and hadn't called back. So I'd made my own life. Small, quiet, careful. I took my suppressants religiously, kept my scent locked down tight, never let anyone at work know my designation. On paper, I passed as beta, which was exactly how I wanted it. Omegas in corporate settings got treated differently. Fewer promotions, more assumptions, the constant undercurrent of, shouldn't you be home nesting somewhere? I'd watched it happen to others and decided early that invisibility was safer than authenticity. Everything unraveled on a Monday. I walked into the office, coffee in hand, ready for a normal day, and my manager called me into his office before I'd even sat down. "Haru, we need to talk." Dan Morrison was a beta in his 50s who'd always been decent to me, but his face that morning told me everything before he opened his mouth. "The company is restructuring. Your position has been eliminated. I'm sorry." Just like that. 2 years of showing up early, staying late, never missing a deadline, never complaining. Gone in one sentence. He handed me a folder with severance details. 2 weeks of pay. My health insurance would end at the end of the month. My suppressant prescription was tied to that insurance. I walked out of the building carrying a box of my things, and the Seattle rain hit my face like a slap. 2 weeks of severance. Rent due in 10 days. Suppressants that cost $400 a month without insurance. And my heat cycle, which I'd been managing like clockwork for years, was due in 3 weeks. I did the math on the bus ride home, and the numbers didn't work. They didn't work from any angle. I applied for jobs that afternoon, and the next day, and the day after that. I applied to everything: design positions, administrative roles, coffee shops, retail, anything. But Seattle's job market was brutal, and being an Omega, even a closeted one, meant that the moment any employer ran a designation check, which was technically illegal but happened constantly, my application moved to the bottom of the pile. 2 weeks passed. No callbacks. My severance ran out. Rent was due, and I didn't have it. My landlord, a beta woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd always been kind, knocked on my door on a Wednesday evening. "Haru, I'm sorry. I've given you as much time as I can, but I have my own bills. You have until Friday." Friday. 3 days. I sat on my bed after she left and stared at the wall and tried to figure out how I'd gone from functioning adult to homeless in 14 days. I called every resource I could find. Omega assistance programs had waiting lists months long. Emergency housing required documentation I didn't have because I'd never registered my designation publicly. Shelters were full. The only place with immediate availability was the downtown Omega Bonding Center, and everyone knew what that place really was. It called itself a transitional housing facility for unbonded Omegas, but the reality was darker. You checked in, they housed you, fed you, monitored your heats, and then they matched you. The center had partnerships with alpha families looking for Omegas, wealthy families, powerful families, families who wanted a compliant, grateful Omega who wouldn't ask too many questions because where else would they go? It wasn't technically forced bonding. Everything was technically voluntary. But when the alternative was the street, voluntary was a generous word. I packed my things on Thursday night. Everything I owned fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. I sat on the bare mattress in my empty apartment and let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes. Then I stopped, washed my face, and made a plan. I would go to the bonding center. I would sign the forms. I would let them house me until I figured something else out. And I would not, under any circumstances, let them match me with some alpha who wanted a domestic Omega to warm his bed and raise his pups. I'd survived this. I'd survived everything else. Friday morning, I dragged my suitcases through the rain to the bonding center on First Avenue. The building was clean and modern on the outside, all glass and brushed steel, designed to look progressive and welcoming. Inside, it smelled like industrial cleaner and anxiety. The lobby was full of omegas, some young, some older, all wearing the same expression I probably had on my face. Resignation mixed with the faint hope that this was temporary. The intake officer was an older beta woman with tired eyes. She processed me efficiently, asked standard questions, took my photo, handed me the clipboard. And that's where we came in. That's where the alpha in the black coat appeared in the doorway and told me to put the pen down. Except here's the part I left out. I knew him. Not personally, not like that, but I knew who he was, because everyone in Seattle knew who Ren Matsuda was. CEO of Matsuda Group, one of the largest tech conglomerates on the West Coast. Alpha, 31 years old, worth more money than I could conceptualize. His face was in business magazines, on news sites, on the most eligible alpha lists that Omega gossip blogs obsessed over. Sharp features, always composed, always controlled, with a reputation for being brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. And he was standing in the lobby of an Omega bonding center at 9 in the morning, telling the intake officer that I was leaving with him. "I don't know you," I said, even though that was only half true. "I know," he said calmly, "but you're not signing that form. You don't get to decide that. You're right, but I'm asking you not to." Something in his voice shifted. The command softened into something that almost sounded like concern. "Do you know what happens to Omegas who sign those forms?" "I know exactly what happens. I'm not naive." "Then why are you here?" "Because I don't have anywhere else to go." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, stripped of self-pity. I'd used up all my self-pity last night on that empty mattress. His jaw tightened. He looked at me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years. Not looked at, not assessed. Seen. "You do now," he said. "Come with me. I'll explain everything, and if you still want to come back here after, I'll drive you myself." The intake officer was watching this exchange with wide eyes. The other Omegas in the lobby were staring. I could feel their collective confusion mixing with my own. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. "Ren Matsuda, CEO, Matsuda Group." He held it out. "Because 3 months ago, you designed a logo for my company's subsidiary. A freelance job through a third-party agency. You never knew it was my company, and I never knew the designer was an Omega about to check himself into a bonding center." He paused. "I've been trying to find you for weeks. Your old firm said you'd been let go. Your phone was disconnected. I came here on a hunch." I stared at the card. The freelance job. I'd done it 2 months ago through a gig platform, desperate for any income. A tech company needed a brand refresh. I'd poured everything into it, working 18-hour days in my rapidly emptying apartment because it was the only work I could get. I've been paid $300. "You came here looking for a graphic designer?" I said slowly. "I came here looking for you." The way he said it made something behind my ribs ache. "I have a car outside. 30 minutes. One conversation. That's all I'm asking." I looked at the clipboard, at the form that would sign away my autonomy in exchange for a roof and 3 meals a day. Then I looked at the alpha whose scent was still doing dangerous things to my composure. 30 minutes, I said. His car was, predictably, a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver. He opened the door for me himself, which surprised me. Alphas like him usually had people for that. Inside, the car smelled like him, cedar and black tea. My Omega instincts, the ones I'd been suppressing for years, hummed quietly. I ignored them. talk," I said, because I wasn't going to make this easy for him. He sat across from me, long legs taking up too much space, and folded his hands. 3 months ago, my company acquired a startup called Verdant Technologies. Part of the acquisition required a complete rebrand. The agency we hired outsourced the logo design. What came back was the best work I've seen in 10 years. I waited. I wanted to hire the designer directly, full-time, senior position. But the agency wouldn't release your name, and by the time my legal team got through their contracts, you'd already been let go from your day job and fallen off the grid. So you tracked me to an Omega bonding center. I tracked you through your former employer, your landlord, and 3 different freelance platforms. The bonding center was my last option. I was hoping I'd be wrong. He said it like the idea of me being here physically bothered him, and I didn't know what to do with that. "You want to offer me a job?" I said, trying to anchor the conversation to something practical. "Yes. A real job, with a salary and benefits. Senior designer, my creative team. Salary, full benefits, including suppressant coverage, signing bonus, and relocation assistance." My heart was hammering, but I kept my face neutral. "And the part about sleeping next to you?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "That was my alpha talking. I apologize. It was inappropriate." "But you said it." "I did, because my instincts reacted to something about you the moment I walked into that lobby, and the idea of you sleeping in a bonding center made every protective impulse I have go haywire." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not going to pretend I don't find you compelling, Haru. But the job offer stands regardless of anything personal. If you want to work for me and never speak to me outside of meetings, that's your right." It was a good answer, measured, respectful, giving me control, which made it harder to dismiss. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course." He reached into his coat again and pulled out an envelope. "In the meantime, this is an advance on your signing bonus, non-refundable whether you take the job or not. Consider it payment for the logo work, which you were criminally underpaid for." I opened the envelope and my vision blurred. A cashier's check for $25,000. "I can't accept this." "You can, and I strongly suggest you do, because your alternative is that clipboard." He wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. "I'm not going to owe you," I said, my voice tight. "You don't owe me anything. This is what the work was worth. What the agency paid you was theft." I stared at the check. $25,000. Enough for first and last month's rent on a new apartment. Enough for suppressants. Enough to breathe. "I'll think about the job," I said finally. "Take whatever time you need. My number is on the card." His driver took me to a hotel that Ren had apparently already booked. A suite, not a room. When I tried to argue, the driver said Mr. Matsuda had anticipated my objection and asked him to relay that the reservation was non-cancelable and non-refundable, so I might as well use it. I stood in the middle of a hotel suite that was bigger than my old apartment, holding a check that would change my life, and tried to figure out what had just happened. I lasted 3 days before I called him. Not because I'd made a decision about the job, but because I needed to understand why. Why me? Why this much effort for a freelance designer he'd never met? He answered on the first ring. "Haru?" The way he said my name, like he'd been waiting for it, made my stomach flip. "I have questions," I said. "I expected you would. Dinner tonight? I know a place that's quiet. We can talk without an audience." I should have said no. Should have kept this professional. But I said yes, because I was tired of being alone with my thoughts, and his voice on the phone made the knot in my chest loosen just slightly. The restaurant was Japanese, which felt intentional. A small izakaya in the international district, not the kind of flashy place I'd expected. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, his coat draped over the seat beside him. He stood when he saw me, another small gesture that caught me off guard. "Thank you for coming," he said, like I was doing him a favor. We ordered. He let me choose, didn't try to impress me with expensive sake or courses I couldn't pronounce. I ordered yakitori and edamame and a beer because I needed something to do with my hands. "Ask your questions," he said. "Why did you really come to the bonding center yourself? You have assistants, recruiters, an entire HR department. Why did the CEO of a tech empire personally walk into an Omega holding facility?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because when I found out where you were, I couldn't send someone else. It didn't feel right. Signing that form is the kind of thing you don't come back from easily, and I didn't trust anyone else to get there in time." "That's a lot of urgency for someone you've never met." "I know your work," he said. "I've been studying it for 3 months. Every piece I could find. Your portfolio, your freelance projects, even student work from before you graduated high school. Do you know what I see in your designs?" I shook my head. "Someone who thinks in color and light and movement. Someone who solves problems visually in ways that most designers never learn, no matter how much schooling they have. You're self-taught, aren't you?" "Mostly," I admitted. "Couldn't afford design school." "And still, you produced work that my entire creative department, staffed with graduates from the best programs in the country, couldn't match. That matters to me. Talent like yours matters to me." He said it with the same intensity he probably used in boardrooms, and I felt the heat crawl up my neck. "That explains the job offer," I said carefully. "It doesn't explain the way you looked at me in that lobby." He set down his glass. "No, it doesn't." The silence between us was heavy, but not uncomfortable. "I'm going to be honest with you," he continued, "because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve careful corporate language. When I walked into that lobby and saw you, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. I don't have a name for it yet, but it was strong enough that sending you into that center felt physically wrong to me." He wasn't calling it what it was. I noticed that. He could have said scent match, could have played the biology card that would have given him a claim on me by instinct alone. He didn't. He kept it vague, kept it honest, kept the power in my hand. And that restraint told me more about who he was than any grand declaration could have. "Take the job," he said. "That's separate from everything else. Take the job because you're brilliant and you deserve to be paid what you're worth. And if you want to explore the rest, we do that on your terms, your pace, your rules. And if I take the job and tell you that the rest is off the table, then I'll be your boss and nothing else, and I'll respect that completely." I wanted to believe him. Something in me desperately wanted to, but I'd learned the hard way that alphas who said pretty things didn't always mean them. "I'll take the job," I said, "on a trial basis, 3 months. And during those 3 months, we keep it professional." "Agreed. No special treatment. I report to the creative director, not to you. My coworkers don't know about any of this." "Agreed. And if I decide at any point that this isn't working, I walk away with no consequences." "Also agreed." He held out his hand. I shook it, and the contact sent an electric charge through me that I wasn't expecting. His fingers tightened around mine for just a second longer than necessary. "Welcome to Matsuda Group," he said. And something in his smile told me that keeping things professional was going to be much harder than either of us was pretending. I started the following Monday, The Matsuda Group offices occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower downtown, and walking into the creative department felt like stepping into another world. The space was open, bright, filled with the kind of equipment I'd only ever seen in YouTube reviews. My desk had a setup that would have taken me 3 years to save for. My creative director was a beta woman named Suki Park, mid-30s, sharp, no nonsense, with an eye for design that immediately earned my respect. She handed me my first project within an hour of arrival and didn't mention my designation once. Either she didn't know or she didn't care. Both options felt like freedom. For the first 2 weeks, I barely saw Ren. He was on a different floor, in a different world. Meetings with investors, conference calls with international partners, the machinery of running an empire. I told myself I was relieved, that the distance was exactly what I needed to keep my head straight. But sometimes I'd catch his scent in the elevator. Faint, hours old, but enough to make my pulse quicken. And once, walking past a conference room with glass walls, I'd glanced in and found him already looking at me. Our eyes had locked for maybe 2 seconds before I looked away and kept walking. 2 seconds shouldn't have felt like a conversation. The third week, everything shifted. I was working late, the only one left in the creative department, trying to finalize a presentation for a client pitch. The office was quiet, lit only by my desk lamp and the glow of my monitor. I didn't hear him approach. "You're still here." I startled, knocking over my coffee. Ren caught the cup before it spilled, his reflexes annoyingly fast, and set it back on my desk. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to scare you." "You didn't scare me. You startled me. There's a difference." His mouth twitched. "Noted. Why are you still working? It's almost 11. "Client pitches tomorrow. The deck isn't ready." He pulled up a chair and sat down next to me, close enough that his scent wrapped around me like a blanket I hadn't asked for, but desperately wanted. "Show me." I should have told him to leave, should have reminded him about professional boundaries. Instead, I walked him through the presentation, and he listened with genuine attention, asking questions that proved he understood design at a level most CEOs didn't bother with. "This section," he pointed at a slide, "the transition is too safe. You're holding back." "I'm being strategic." "You're being careful. There's a difference." He echoed my own words back at me with a slight smile. "The work you did on the Verdant logo wasn't careful. It was bold, confident. That's the version of you I hired." Something about the way he said it, like he could see the difference between who I was and who I was performing as, cracked something open in my chest. I reworked the section while he watched, and when I finished, the new version was better. He knew it. I knew it. "There," he said softly. "That's you." Our faces were close, too close. I could count the darker flecks in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath. My gaze dropped to his mouth involuntarily, and when I looked back up, his expression had changed. Darker, focused. "Haru," he said, and the way his voice dropped made my Omega instincts flare hard enough that I felt it in my spine. "Professional boundaries," I whispered. "I know." But neither of us moved. "I should go home," I said. "I'll drive you." "That's not necessary." "It's 11 at night, and you're in Omega alone in downtown Seattle. I'm driving you." The alpha command in his voice was subtle but unmistakable, and my body responded before my brain could argue. He drove me himself, not his driver. A different car, simpler, like he'd planned to be normal tonight. We sat in silence for most of the ride, his scent filling the small space until I felt dizzy with it. When he pulled up outside my new apartment, the one I'd rented with his advance money, he put the car in park but didn't unlock the doors. I'm trying very hard to respect the boundaries you set, he said, staring straight ahead. I know. It's getting harder. I know that too. He turned to look at me. Tell me to stop. Tell me you don't feel this and I'll stop. I'll be your boss and nothing else, and I'll never bring it up again. I should have told him to stop. Every rational part of me screamed that this was too fast, too much, too dangerous, that I'd spent 7 years building walls for a reason, that alphas who said things like this always wanted something. But Ren wasn't every alpha, and the way he looked at me, the way he waited for my answer, without pressure, without pulling rank, without using his scent or his voice to influence me, that was something I'd never experienced before. I can't tell you that, I said quietly, because I'd be lying. Something like relief washed over his face. Then what do you want to do about it? I don't know yet, but I need you to be patient with me. I can be patient. I mean, really patient. I've never done this. I've never let anyone close enough for this. I know. He reached over and gently, so gently, took my hand. The touch was simple, just his fingers lacing through mine, but it felt monumental. Whatever pace you need, Haru. I'll follow your lead. I squeezed his hand once, then let go and opened the car door. Good night, Ren. Good night. I made it inside my apartment before the shaking started. Not fear, not anxiety. Something else entirely. Something that felt terrifyingly like hope. After that night, the boundaries didn't dissolve. They just became more honest. We didn't pretend anymore that this was purely professional, but we moved slowly, carefully. Lunches in his office with the door open because I insisted on transparency. Evening walks after work along the waterfront where we talked about everything except the thing growing between us. He learned that I hated coffee, but drank it anyway because I couldn't afford tea that was any good. The next morning, a box of high-grade Japanese green tea appeared on my desk with no note. I learned that he read philosophy at night when he couldn't sleep, that he'd lost his father at 22 and taken over the company at 24, that the weight of 7,000 employees' livelihoods sat on his shoulders constantly, and he never complained about it to anyone. You can complain to me, I told him one evening as we sat on a bench overlooking the Sound. He looked at me with an expression I was starting to recognize, the one that meant he was fighting the urge to pull me closer. Careful, he said. If I start leaning on you, I might not stop. Maybe that's okay. His hand found mine on the bench. This time, I didn't pull away. I learned other things, too. That he cooked when he was stressed, elaborate Japanese dishes his mother had taught him before she died. That he kept a worn copy of Basho's poetry on his nightstand. That he was terrified of failing the people who depended on him, and that fear lived in his chest like a second heartbeat he never showed anyone. He told me that one night over takeout in his office, both of us sitting on the floor because the couch felt too formal, and I'd realized with a quiet shock that the most powerful alpha in Seattle was lonely. That beneath the boardroom control and the commanding scent and the empire, there was a man who hadn't let anyone see him in years, the same way I hadn't let anyone see me. A month and a half in, my suppressant started failing. It was subtle at first. My scent, which I'd kept locked down for years, began leaking through. A coworker commented that I smelled nice, and I'd frozen at my desk. Then the temperature fluctuations started. Hot, then cold, then hot again. Cramping at odd hours. My body preparing for a heat cycle that my suppressants should have been blocking. I called my doctor, who told me what I already suspected. The generic suppressants I'd switched to when I lost my insurance were weaker than my old prescription. My body was adjusting, breaking through. I needed either a stronger prescription or I needed to let the heat happen. The stronger prescription cost $600 a month. My new insurance covered my old brand, but it wouldn't kick in for another 2 weeks. I had 9 days. "You smell different," Ren said it the next morning in the elevator, just the two of us. The doors closed, and his nostrils flared slightly before he caught himself. "Sorry, that was inappropriate." "It's fine. My suppressants are failing." His entire body went rigid. "When?" 9 days, maybe less." "What do you need?" "I need my insurance to kick in 2 weeks faster than it's going to." He pulled out his phone. "I can make a call." "Ren, no." "Haru, I don't want you to fix this for me. I've handled my heats alone for 7 years. I'll handle this one too." He put his phone away, but the tension in his jaw told me exactly how much restraint that cost him. "Will you at least tell me when it starts, so I know you're safe?" "Why?" "Because the thought of you going through that alone, in pain, with no one to help you." He stopped himself, closed his eyes, took a deliberate breath. "Because I care about you, and I know you can handle it yourself, but I don't want you to have to." The elevator doors opened. People were waiting. I stepped out, paused, and looked back at him. "I'll text you," I said. The relief on his face was almost painful to witness. 7 days later, my heat hit. It started at work, which was the worst possible scenario. I felt it coming during a morning meeting. The flush, the cramping, the sudden hypersensitivity to every scent in the room. I excused myself, made it to the bathroom, locked the stall, and pressed my forehead against the cool metal while my body betrayed every wall I'd built. My phone was in my shaking hand. I texted Ren 3 words. "It's starting. Work." He was at the bathroom door in 4 minutes. "Haru, it's me. Can you walk?" "I think so." "I'm getting you out of the building. My car's in the garage. Can you make it to the elevator?" I opened the stall and he was standing there, his face tight with control, every muscle coiled. His scent had shifted, responding to mine, and the combination made my knees buckle. He caught me, his arms steady around me, holding me upright. "I've got you," he murmured. "Don't let go." "Never." He got me to his car. I was shaking badly by then, the first real wave of heat crashing through my suppressant-weakened defenses. Every nerve was on fire. His scent was everywhere, and my body was screaming for things my mind wasn't ready for. "Where am I taking you?" he asked as he pulled out of the garage. "My apartment," I managed through gritted teeth. "Alone?" The question was careful, controlled. I could see what it cost him to ask instead of decide. I've always done this alone. I don't know how to." My voice cracked. "I'm scared." He pulled the car over, right there on the street, put it in park, and turned to face me fully. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm but unbearably gentle. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I will take you home, and I will leave if that's what you want. But if you want me to stay, not to touch you, not to do anything, just to be there so you're not alone, I will do that too." My eyes were blurring, from the heat, from the emotion, from 7 years of doing everything alone finally catching up to me. "Stay," I whispered. "But I don't know if I can control what I—" "You don't have to control anything. I'll control myself enough for both of us. I promise you, Haru. Nothing happens that you don't want." He drove me home. He carried my nesting supplies from the closet because I'd been too embarrassed to set them up before. He helped me build a nest on my bed and didn't comment on the fact that I'd unconsciously included the scarf he'd left in my apartment the week before. His scent woven into the fabric like a thread I'd been clinging to without admitting it. He made me tea. He sat in a chair across the room while my heat peaked and my body ached, and every omega instinct I had begged me to crawl into his lap and never leave. "Talk to me," I gasped during a particularly bad wave. "About what?" "Anything. Your voice helps." So he talked. About the first building his father ever designed. About the time he got lost in Tokyo as a child and a stranger walked him back to his hotel. About a basho poem he'd memorized as a teenager, something about an old pond and a frog and the sound of water, and how he'd never understood it until he was older and realized the beauty was in the silence after the splash, not the splash itself. His voice wrapped around me like a second blanket, steady and deep, and I clung to it. "You're doing so well," he said at one point, and the quiet pride in his voice made something inside me break open. "I want you closer," I admitted. It was the hardest thing I'd ever said. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I'm not asking you to. I need you closer. Please." He moved to the bed, sat against the headboard, and I crawled into his arms and pressed my face against his neck where his scent was strongest, and finally, let myself be held. He didn't do anything else. Didn't push, didn't take advantage, didn't let his hands wander. He just held me through 3 days of heat, feeding me when I could eat, giving me water when I couldn't, talking me through the worst of it with a patience that shouldn't have been possible for an alpha holding his scent match through a heat. Because that's what I'd figured out somewhere during day 2, when his scent had synced so perfectly with mine that I couldn't tell where his ended and mine began. Scent match. The thing I dismissed as fairy tales. The biological certainty that this alpha and this omega were made for each other. He hadn't told me. He'd known since the bonding center, I was sure of it. And he hadn't used it, hadn't played that card to claim me or pressure me. He'd just waited, let me come to him on my own terms, and held me without taking what his biology was screaming at him to take. When it finally broke, when my body stopped burning and my mind cleared, I lay in his arms, exhausted and raw and stripped of every defense I'd ever built. "You stayed," I said, my voice wrecked. "I told you I would." "You could have. Any alpha would have, especially one who knows we're scent matched." He went still. "You knew?" "I figured it out about 36 hours ago when your pheromones synced with mine so perfectly I forgot what my own scent smelled like." I pulled back enough to look at him. "You didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" "Because I didn't want it to be about biology. I wanted you to choose me because you wanted to, not because your instincts told you to." I stared at this man, this alpha who had held his scent match through 3 days of heat without touching him, who had kept the most powerful card in the biological deck hidden because he wanted my choice to be free. "You're an idiot," I said. "Probably. When I can stand up without my legs shaking, you're taking me on a proper date." His smile was slow and real and brighter than anything I'd seen on his face before. "Deal." Wow, you've made it this far. If you're enjoying the story and still haven't subscribed, please take a second to do so. It means a lot. Also, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from. All right, let's get back to the story. Our first real date was dinner at the izakaya where we'd had our first honest conversation. He'd reserved the corner booth. I wore a sweater he'd once said brought out the warmth in my eyes, and I'd actually spent 20 minutes on my hair, which was embarrassing to admit even to myself. He noticed. He noticed everything. "You look beautiful," he said when I sat down, and the casualness of it, like stating a fact about the weather, made my face heat. "Stop." "No." We talked for hours. Not about work, not about designation, not about the 1,000 complicated things hanging between us, about movies we loved and movies we hated that turned out to be the same ones, about the worst meals we'd ever eaten, about childhood dreams that had gotten buried under reality. He wanted to be an architect before his father died and the company fell into his lap. I wanted to go to art school in Tokyo before my parents decided omegas didn't deserve education. "We're both living lives we didn't choose," I said. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm starting to think the life I didn't choose led me to something better than anything I could have planned." He was looking at me when he said it. After dinner, he walked me home. At my door, he stopped and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with fingers that were impossibly gentle for an alpha his size. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "You held me through my heat for 3 days, and you're asking permission to kiss me?" "I'll always ask." I pulled him down by his collar and kissed him myself. His hands came to my waist, careful and warm, and he kissed me back with a tenderness that made my chest ache. When we separated, he pressed his forehead against mine. "Go inside before I ask to come in," he said. "Would that be so bad?" "It would be perfect, and that's exactly why I need to wait." He kissed my forehead one more time. "Good night, Haru." "Good night, Ren." I closed the door, leaned against it, and smiled so hard my face hurt. The next 2 months were the happiest I'd ever been. We settled into something real. Dates twice a week, lunches in his office where professional conversation inevitably dissolved into him playing with my fingers across the desk. Late nights where I'd work in his home office while he reviewed contracts, both of us comfortable in silence, my feet in his lap, his hand absently rubbing my ankle while he read. He cooked for me constantly, elaborate meals he'd learned from his mother, simple ones he invented on the spot. I'd sit on his kitchen counter, which he pretended to hate and never stopped me from doing, and sketch while he moved around the space with easy confidence. He introduced me to his world slowly. His best friend and head of security, a massive alpha named Tomo, who looked at me with clear approval and told me quietly, "He hasn't smiled like that in years." His assistant, a sharp beta named Lisa, who'd been screening potential omegas for him for years and seemed relieved she could finally stop. He met my world too, which took considerably less time because my world was small. Jay, my only friend, who'd stared at Ren with a mixture of terror and amazement during their first meeting. "So," Jay had said later when Ren stepped away, "you're dating the most powerful alpha in Seattle." "I know." "The man whose company you freelanced for." "I know, Jay." "You're welcome for helping you find that gig." I'd thrown a napkin at his head, and he'd grinned. Everything was good. Almost too good, and I should have known that's when it would shatter. It started with a headline. I was scrolling through my phone during my lunch break when I saw it. Matsuda Group CEO spotted with mystery omega. Sources say Ren Matsuda has been keeping a secret relationship with a low-status omega employee. Below the headline, photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Ren and me walking along the waterfront. Ren opening his car door for me. Ren's hand on the small of my back as we entered the izakaya. And my face, clear enough for anyone who knew me to recognize. The article was vicious in the way tabloids always are when an omega doesn't know their place. It called me a gold digger, pointed out my lack of education, my previous minimum wage jobs, my designation like it was a criminal record. It quoted anonymous sources within Matsuda Group who questioned whether the CEO's judgment had been compromised by omega pheromones. It even found my parents. The Nishikawa family declined to comment on their estranged Omega son's relationship with the tech billionaire. My phone buzzed. Jay. Then Suki. Then numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it off and walked to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall and couldn't breathe. Every fear I'd ever had about being visible, about being known as an Omega, about what happened when people saw what I really was, all of it crashed into me at once. This was exactly why I'd stayed hidden. This was exactly why invisibility was safer than authenticity. Because the moment the world saw me, it decided I was worthless. I left the building before Ren could find me, took the bus home, sat in my apartment staring at the wall, and for the first time since the bonding center, I felt that old familiar numbness settle over me like a blanket. The numbness that came before giving up. Ren called 17 times. I didn't answer. He texted, "Haru, please, let me explain. I'll fix this." But he couldn't fix this. The photographs were out. The story was out. Tomorrow, everyone at Matsuda Group would know that their CEO's new designer was an Omega he'd rescued from a bonding center. Every piece of work I'd done, every project Suki had praised, every client who'd been impressed, all of it would be reframed. Not talented, just the boss's Omega. Not skilled, just sleeping his way up. Not worthy, just a bonding center Omega who got lucky. I couldn't go back to that office. I couldn't face the whispers, the knowing looks, the assumption that everything I'd earned was actually given. And I couldn't stay here, in an apartment paid for by Ren's money, wearing clothes he'd helped me buy, living a life that the entire world now believed was purchased. The next morning, I wrote Ren a letter. Not a text, not a call, a letter, because I needed the words to be careful, to not crack the way my voice would. I told him the truth, that being with him was the best thing that had ever happened to me, that I wasn't angry at him, that this wasn't his fault, but that I couldn't be the Omega the tabloids were describing. I couldn't become a story about a helpless Omega rescued by a powerful Alpha. I'd spent 7 years building an identity that wasn't defined by my designation, and I'd rather lose him than lose myself. I left the letter on his desk at the office, along with my resignation and the ring he'd given me on a chain that I'd been wearing around my neck for the past 2 weeks, close to my heart, where no one could see it. Then I packed a bag and went to Jay's apartment, and I didn't look back. Jay didn't ask questions. He made up the couch, handed me a beer, and sat with me while I stared at nothing. "He's going to come looking for you," Jay said finally. "I know. And you're going to feel like garbage for about a week. And then you're going to realize you made a mistake. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. But you need to figure that out yourself. So I'm going to shut up now." Jay was right about the feeling like garbage part. The next 5 days were the worst of my life, and that was saying something for someone who'd almost signed himself into a bonding center. Everything hurt, not just emotionally, physically. The scent bond that had been building between Ren and me for months was unfinished but present enough that separation felt like withdrawal. My body ached for his scent. My Omega instincts howled at the absence. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except the look I imagined on his face when he found that letter. On the 3rd day, Jay came home and sat down across from me with an expression that was equal parts gentle and fed up. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." "What?" "Ren held a press conference this morning." My stomach dropped. "He didn't deny the relationship. He confirmed it, publicly, on camera, in front of every business journalist in Seattle." "He what?" He said, and I'm quoting here because I recorded it, "Haru Nishikawa is the most talented designer I've ever worked with. He's also the man I'm in love with. His designation is Omega, and that fact changes nothing about his brilliance, his value, or his right to be treated with dignity. Anyone within my organization or outside of it who disagrees is welcome to find employment elsewhere. Jay paused. Then he fired the board member who leaked the photos. On camera. During the press conference. Haru, I've seen some alpha power moves in my life, but I've never seen anything like that. I sat there, trying to process what Jay was telling me. Ren hadn't hidden, hadn't spun the story, hadn't protected his reputation at my expense. He'd stood in front of the world and chosen me. Publicly. Permanently. With consequences. There's more, Jay said. What? He's been trying to reach you. He called me an hour ago. He said he respects your decision, that if you really want to leave, he won't stop you. But he wants you to know that the letter you left him, the part about not wanting to be defined by your designation, he read it 12 times. And he said the only person defining you by your designation is you. The words hit me like a physical blow, because he was right. The tabloid had called me a gold digger, a low-status Omega, a bonding center rescue. And instead of fighting that narrative, I'd run. I'd confirmed it. I'd let them define me by the exact thing I'd sworn I'd never be defined by. Because when it got hard, I fell back on the same story my parents had written for me, that I was less than, that I didn't deserve to take up space, that visibility was dangerous. But Ren had never treated me that way, not once. He'd seen the designer, the person, the stubborn Omega who argued with him and challenged him and refused to be grateful. He'd seen me, and I'd punished him for it by disappearing. I need to go to him, I said. Yeah, Jay said. You really do. I showed up at his penthouse at 9 in the evening, still wearing Jay's borrowed sweater, looking like I hadn't slept in 5 days because I hadn't. Tomo opened the door, took one look at me, and stepped aside without a word. Ren was in his home office, sitting in the dark with a glass of something he wasn't drinking, staring at the city lights. He looked wrecked, exhausted, like the past 5 days had carved something essential out of him. When he saw me, he stood up slowly, like he was afraid I'd bolt if he moved too fast. Haru. You held a press conference, I said. You fired a board member on camera. He deserved it. You told the entire city you're in love with me. I told the entire city the truth. My eyes were burning. I left you a resignation letter and a ring, and you responded by going to war for me in front of the press. Yes. Why? He crossed the room, stopped just close enough that I could feel his warmth but not his touch. Because you asked me once what you are to me, and I didn't answer properly. So let me answer now. He took my face in his hands, gently, like I was something precious he was terrified of breaking. You are the bravest person I've ever known. You are the reason I remember what it feels like to not be alone. And I would rather burn my company to the ground than let anyone, including you, convince you that you're less than extraordinary. I'm sorry, I whispered. I got scared, and I ran. I know. And you're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to run. But please, Haru, run to me, not away from me. I closed the distance between us and kissed him, hard and desperate and full of everything I'd been holding back for 5 days, for 7 years, for my entire life. He caught me, held me, kissed me back with an intensity that made my knees give out. And when he lifted me off the ground, I wrapped myself around him and held on like I'd never let go. "Don't leave again," he said against my mouth. "I won't." "Promise me." "I promise." He pressed his forehead to mine. "I love you, Haru." "I love you too," I said, and the words felt like coming home. 2 weeks after I came back, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me had changed. The part of me that ran from hard things had been confronted and defeated, and I wasn't going to let it win again. "Haru." Her voice was careful, tentative. "I saw the news about you and Mr. Matsuda." "His name is Ren." "Yes, Ren." A pause. "Your father is sick. Very sick. He's been diagnosed with a degenerative condition. The doctors say he has maybe 2 years. My hand tightened on the phone. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Kenji's bonding ceremony is next month. Your father wants you there. All of us. Together. So he can parade his perfect alpha sons bonding while I stand in the corner being the family disappointment?" "No." Her voice cracked. "So he can tell you he was wrong. About everything. About you." I hung up without answering. But this time, I didn't sit alone with it. I told Ren that evening while he cooked dinner and I sat on his counter, our counter, sketching. "What do you want to do?" he asked, not looking up from the pot he was stirring, giving me space to feel what I needed to feel without being watched. Part of me wants to go. Show them who I am now. Part of me is terrified that the moment I walk through that door, I'll be invisible again. He set down the spoon and looked at me. "You will never be invisible again. Not while I'm standing next to you." So I went. We flew to San Francisco together. Kenji's bonding ceremony was at a hotel in Pacific Heights, the kind of venue that whispered old money. I wore a suit Ren had custom made for me, dark gray, perfectly fitted, subtle but expensive in a way that spoke for itself. His hand was on the small of my back as we walked in, and that felt like a statement loud enough. My mother spotted me first. She looked older, smaller, and when her eyes moved from me to Ren, I watched her expression cycle through confusion, recognition, and shock. "Haru? You came." "You asked me to." "This is Ren Matsuda," I said calmly. "My partner." My mother's mouth opened and closed. Even in my family's limited social circles, the Matsuda name carried weight, especially after the press conference. "Mr. Matsuda," she managed. "It's an honor." "Mrs. Nishikawa." Ren's voice was perfectly polite and absolutely frigid. "Thank you for inviting Haru." The emphasis on my name was deliberate, a reminder that I existed, that I had a name they'd stopped saying years ago. Kenji appeared next with Ryota, his Omega, a quiet young man who looked at me with wide, sympathetic eyes that told me he understood more about being the Omega in an alpha family than anyone here would admit. My brother looked exactly as I remembered, tall, handsome, confident in the way only a golden child alpha could be. "Haru," he said, and at least he had the decency to look uncomfortable. "It's good to see you." "Kenji, congratulations." Then my father. He was in a wheelchair, which I hadn't expected. The disease had progressed faster than my mother had suggested. He'd lost weight, lost the imposing physical presence that had once made me shrink. But his eyes, when they found me, were sharp as ever. "Haru." His voice was weaker, but still carried that tone I remembered, the one that always made me feel like I was taking up space I didn't deserve. Father. He looked at Ren, then back at me, then at Ren again. Matsuda, he said slowly. The tech company. Among other things, Ren said. Your son is my senior designer and the most talented person in my organization. He's also my partner. So if anyone in this room makes him feel less than extraordinary tonight, we'll be leaving, and I won't be polite about it. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at Ren with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, something between respect and fear, and the dawning realization that the Omega son he'd discarded had been claimed by exactly the kind of alpha he'd always wanted his children to be. I see, my father said finally. Then, quieter, you've done well, Haru. 4 words, after 7 years of nothing. 4 words that shouldn't have meant anything, but made my eyes burn. Ren's hand tightened on my back. I nodded once and moved past my father into the reception. Ren stayed close all evening, not hovering, not performative, just present, his hand finding mine under the table, his scent steady and grounding when my anxiety spiked. When an uncle I barely remembered made a comment about the Omega son bringing home a rich alpha, finally useful for something, Ren turned to him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, Haru is useful for far more than anything your imagination can supply. I'd be careful about the next thing that comes out of your mouth. The uncle went pale and excused himself. Near the end of the evening, my father asked to speak with me alone. We found a quiet alcove away from the reception. He looked exhausted, diminished, nothing like the man who'd once told me my education was a waste of money. I was wrong, he said. No preamble, no build-up. About everything. About you. About what you were capable of. About what you deserved. Yes, I said. You were. I don't expect forgiveness. Good. Because I'm not ready to give it. He nodded slowly. But you came. I came for me, not for you. I needed to see that I could stand in this room and not be invisible anymore. You're not, he said. You haven't been for a long time. I was just too stupid and too proud to see it. I looked at this man, my father, who'd shaped my worst fears and my deepest wounds, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but maybe the beginning of letting go. I'm not coming back into the family, I said clearly. I have my own life now, my own people. But I'll visit when I can, and I'll answer the phone when Mom calls. His eyes were wet. That's more than I deserve. Yes, I agreed. It is. When I walked back to the reception, Ren was waiting. He searched my face and I saw the question in his eyes. I'm okay, I said. Really okay. He pulled me close and pressed his lips to my temple. Ready to go home? Yes. Take me home. On the flight back to Seattle, he held my hand the entire time, and when we landed, he drove us to our penthouse, and he was quiet as we walked inside, quieter than usual. I was hanging up my coat when he said my name in a way that made me turn around. He was standing in the middle of the living room holding a small box. I was going to wait, he said. I had a plan. Dinner at the izakaya, the corner booth, a whole speech prepared. But watching you tonight, watching you stand in that room and reclaim yourself and refuse to be invisible, I don't want to wait anymore. My heart stopped. Haru Nishikawa, he said. You walked into my life with 2 suitcases and a limp, and more courage than anyone I've ever met. You challenged me, humbled me, made me want to be better than the alpha the world expected me to be. I held a press conference and burned bridges with my own board because the thought of you believing you're anything less than extraordinary made me angrier than anything in my life. I don't want to be your boss. I don't want to be your partner. I want to be your mate, your husband, your home, for the rest of our lives. He opened the box, a simple platinum band, elegant, understated, perfect. Will you bond with me? I was crying. I hadn't even realized it until I felt the tears on my face. You said you'd follow my lead, I managed through the tears. I am. Your lead brought me here. I crossed the room in 3 steps and kissed him so hard we stumbled backward. Yes, I said against his mouth. Yes, yes, yes. He slipped the ring on my finger, and it fit perfectly because of course it did. Everything about us fit perfectly, even when it shouldn't have, even when the world said it couldn't. Mine, he said, pressing his forehead to mine. Yours, I whispered. Always. We bonded on a Saturday morning in our penthouse, just the 2 of us and an officiant. No grand ceremony, no hundreds of guests. I wore white, he wore black. And when we exchanged bites, his teeth gentle and certain on my neck, I felt the bond snap into place like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. The sensation was overwhelming, his emotions flooding into me, mine into him. Joy and relief and love so intense it felt like drowning in the best possible way. I feel you, I gasped. Everything. I feel everything. Good. His voice was rough, his eyes bright. Now you'll always know. Tomo was our witness. Jay cried, which he denied later. Lisa brought champagne and told me she'd never seen Ren happy before me and made me promise to never break his heart. I won't, I said. I know. She smiled. That's why I like you. 6 months later, I stood at the window of our penthouse, watching Seattle spread out below us, lights glittering against the dark water of the Sound. My hand rested on my stomach, where something new and impossible was growing. 8 weeks, the doctor had said that morning. Perfectly healthy. Ren had held my hand during the ultrasound, and when the heartbeat filled the room, I'd watched the most powerful alpha in Seattle press his face against my shoulder and cry. I didn't think I could be this happy, he said that evening, his arms around me from behind, his hands covering mine over my stomach. Neither did I. You know what I keep thinking about? What? That morning at the bonding center. What would have happened if I'd been 5 minutes later? If you'd signed that form? I didn't. Because I got there in time. No. I turned in his arms to face him. Because even before you walked in, something in me was hesitating. Some part of me knew I deserved better than that. I just didn't know what better looked like yet. And now? I smiled. Now it looks like you. He kissed me, slow and thorough, his hand gentle on my stomach where our future was just beginning. And standing there in the home that was ours, bonded to an alpha who saw me when the rest of the world hadn't bothered to look, I understood something I wished I could tell every Omega who'd ever stood in a bonding center lobby with a pen in their hand and nowhere else to go. You are not disposable. You are not a burden. You are not defined by what others failed to see in you. And sometimes, when you're standing at the very edge, ready to sign away everything you are, the thing that saves you isn't an alpha in an expensive coat or a job offer or a $25,000 check. It's the small, stubborn voice inside you that says, "Not yet." I deserve more than this. Listen to that voice. It knows what it's talking about. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell us your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time.